Hello and welcome back to Equity, TechCrunch's flagship podcast about the business of startups. Today is August 23rd, 2024. I'm Ann Azevedo, and joining me is TechCrunch senior editor and resident AI expert, Devin Coldewey. Devin, great to have you on the show again. What's going on?
Not too much. Fortunately, AI is finished. We stopped worrying about AI. No one's doing anything with AI anymore, so that topic is done. So no need to worry about AI anymore. This will be the last time you hear that acronym. So it's a big relief, actually.
Yes, I can imagine. I can imagine so. I'm also very excited to share we're joined by TechCrunch senior reporter Margaux MacColl. Margaux's been with us now for about 2 months. She's awesome. Welcome to the show, Margaux. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
What have you been working on this week?
A lot of defense tech. I'm in DC, so I love talking to DoD folks. Been following a lot of defense tech fundraisers.
Well, we're going to get into defense tech a bit more later in the show. So I'll do a quick rundown for you. Deals of the week, we've got Story, we've got all the drama with Bolt, and a former A16 VC's technocapitalist school. Then for our first theme, we're going to be thinking outside the AI chat box. And lastly, as mentioned, we're going to be looking at the defense tech acquisition spree. So, Devin, your deal of the week involves Story, a company that's raised $80 million at a $2.25 billion valuation to build a blockchain for the business of content IP in the age of AI. Okay, translate. I don't understand exactly what that means.
No, you could have said Web3 in there and gotten a few more like letters and numbers in the headline. This is a story Ingrid wrote about this company that they're sort of riding the wave of every possible buzzword, which is, that's cool. A lot of people do that. And in this case, it's kind of like they're saying, look, in this age of AI, which is how every pitch starts now, there's a question about who can use your IP and how, and can you make money on that? Like as a performer, as a creator, as an actor, like how can you make money when someone says, hey, we want to use your likeness for this ad or whatever? You wouldn't even have to show up on set. There's this sort of idea that that's possible. But of course, everybody's pretty skeptical about it, especially the people whose likenesses are being stolen by the companies doing the stealing.
Yeah.
But this company thinks that the way to do it is blockchain. Everybody says like, oh, blockchain will solve that. And in this case, there is a certain intuitive quality to like, well, if you can provably say this is my likeness, like you're not saying this JPEG of an ape is my JPEG of an ape. You're saying, this is me. I am taking control over my likeness, and provably so. And then someone else can use that likeness or that art or whatever. And it all goes on the blockchain so you can provably say, hey, you did this work, you used this part of my art, and this much, so I can charge you this much. The thing is, we've heard about this kind of idea before, and there's got to be, I myself have been pitched probably 24 of this type of hey, own your likeness, license your likeness kind of tool. And none of them have taken off, I think, because, the market's just not prepared for this kind of weird open market on likenesses. And people have agents, studios have IP restrictions and stuff. So I don't know if it's going to go anywhere. But with $80 million, it can at least go nowhere for another, 2 years before it implodes.
Well, maybe, right? The way a lot of companies have been burning cash, we don't know. Andreessen led this round, which is interesting. It's a crypto fund. So, I hadn't heard, and I think, Margaux, you mentioned this too before the show, we haven't heard this much money being raised in this space in a bit, huh?
I just want to know how much money is left in Andreessen's crypto fund. It determines how many more of these fundraisers we have.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
They were just like, how much is left? Let's just, finish it off. Just empty the bag into these people's, fund, and let's just get out of here.
Yeah, I'm so curious what Chris Dixon's life is like right now.
Oh, right. Yes, he's the one that led this round, right? It was Chris Dixon.
Well, I think that, and Polychain was in there saying, this is a real money quote, so to speak. It says, what Bitcoin did for money and finance, Story is doing for content and IP. Which I think may actually be accurate because in many ways, Bitcoin has done nothing for money and finance, although it has shaken stuff up. And it took part in a lot of discussion, provocative and productive discussion about what money is and how we should use it. But of course, 15, 20 years later, after Bitcoin was a joke, it's a different kind of joke. And I suspect that may be where Story is going. I didn't see there's a lot of like crypto names and stuff in the announcements, but there's not a lot of like, hey, we've got Paramount on board. We've got this representation and, these 3 agencies on board in LA. We've got Ubisoft on board. You can license, the Assassin's Creed characters and likenesses or whatever. Those are the thing about content IP and making this kind of play is it's not about your platform. It's about the people and the IP itself. Like if you can have the biggest platform, the best platform in the world, but if, Tom Cruise is not on it or whoever, then there's no point. Like who will go to your platform if there's nobody to license? It's like if you had Cameo and the only people on Cameo were like a bunch of strangers, like, and not random actors and stuff who were looking to earn a little pin money.
Yeah, I mean, I'm intrigued. It's a lot of money. They're planning to use it to continue building out the product, aiming for a commercial launch later this year. I thought with this kind of valuation and raise that they would be a bit further along. But again, this is crypto. Also, that's not the only company in the space that's raised recently, right? Sahara AI announced $43 million in funding with a similar goal of tracking and monetizing IP as well. That was just last week.
I was not familiar with them, and I suspect that this large amount of money is going to be squandered on like people fronting the product, because you have to pay people. Like people aren't going to voluntarily come to your, license your face to random people. I mean, like what is this quote? Anyone can fork and remix your IP permissionlessly while you capture the upside. Like what actor or what artist would want to take part in a system like that unless the upside was they get $500,000 up front? And I think that a lot of this initial funding is going to go to talent, so you have like Snoop Dogg or something like that, who's like, hey, yeah, I'm on there. And yeah, they paid me $2 million to be on there, but whatever. Now you can permissionlessly reuse my likeness, according to these things. I do actually think a lot of the money goes there because, running a blockchain is expensive only if people use it. The same with AI. They're not doing generative AI themselves, as far as I can tell. They're enabling it. I don't know where the money would go, except to celebrities.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Well, let's move on to my deal of the week, which I would have to say has been one of the more complicated storylines I've worked on in a bit. Still trying to wrap my brain around it, to be honest with you. So it involves fintech called Bolt, one-click checkout company. It's made headlines over the years for a number of reasons. Its outspoken founder, Ryan Breslow, stepped down in February 2022. There were allegations that he misled investors, violated security laws by inflating metrics while fundraising. He was also embroiled in a legal battle with one of his investors, Activant Capital, over a $30 million loan he took out. So he's not been running the company for a couple of years now, yet it came out this week that Bolt is raising a lot of money. Supposedly, initially reports were pegging a raise at $14 billion valuation. The first number floated around was $450 million raise. It's since then become a little murky because apparently $200 million of that is a Series F led by an unnamed firm. We don't even know who yet. And keep in mind, this is just a term sheet. None of this is final. And then there's another $250 million supposedly coming in the form of marketing credits from a firm I'd never heard of, and most of us had not heard of, called the London Fund. And what is crazy about this is, as part of this deal, Ryan would apparently come back to the helm as CEO of Bolt. And not only would he return as CEO, which is just, kind of crazy in and of itself, he could receive a $2 million bonus for doing so, and then an additional $1 million of back pay. Like, this just blew my mind. All of it just blew my mind. I don't fully get all of this, but TLDR is that they're trying to cram down this deal. They're kind of trying to say to existing shareholders, look, it's kind of a pay to play. It's trying to grant itself the ability to buy out 2/3 of non-participating investors at 1 cent a share. And a lot of these investors are probably balking, but what we don't know is, are they going to feel like they have no choice and fold and give in? And then there's so much going on here. Anyone have questions, and I can try to help make a little more sense.
I mean, I always have questions about this kind of thing, because it's like, what even is happening here? Like, it's so much money for a platform that has, I don't use it. I know that there are some places where it's more common, but your interview with Asha Shah at London Fund, I was like, his answers are very non-informative, and they're very sort of like, oh, it's super great. Everything is great, and we think it could be very valuable, maybe. And it's like, well, you're investing hundreds of millions of dollars. You better be really sure. Like, where's I don't know. It feels like it's one of these things where ultimately it's not about a company doing something interesting or valuable, but about investors trading money back and forth and making sure that everybody important gets rich while the service is kind of secondary to that whole thing. But that's my sort of cynical. I assume that anything over $100 million, I assume that's at least part of the deal.
Well, let's point out, journalist Eric Newcomer reported earlier this week that as of the end of March, Bolt's annualized run rate was at $28 million and that the company had $7 million in gross profit. So, obviously that valuation just doesn't correspond with those sort of numbers. The marketing credits was really weird. I've not really heard of that. And yes, in the interview, he explained it because I was like, what do you mean by marketing credits? Like, I'd never heard of this, like trying to really understand it. And he said, basically, they have a fund that has influencers and media as LPs. So the $250 million he kept calling it a cash equivalent. It's not even necessarily cash, and most likely will not be cash. So he's saying they're offering visibility to Bolt, so that influencers and people can speak about services or products. And he said, well, Bolt spends a lot of money on co-marketing dollars, like $80 million. So we can provide that. We can help provide those sort of impressions. So that $250 million, let's be clear, is not necessarily even cash. The $200 million Series F, again, we don't even know for sure who would be leading that. This is being recorded Thursday, midday. I'm talking to someone later today and maybe writing about it by the time this episode comes out to try to find out more details about that. But Dan Premix said in Pro Rata, the $200 million Series F is the guy that he talked to, Brad Pomnini, said that there's a Cayman Island-based private equity firm that's a limited partner in an SPV formed to raise the $200 million for Bolt, but that it will be managed by a new private equity fund in the UAE, which hasn't even yet received government approval for registration in that country. So,
well, that's just a rubber stamp situation. Obviously, completely on the level, no problem whatsoever. Just a regular 9-figure round involving multiple Cayman Islands shell corporations.
Yeah, so I did try to talk to somebody who could, maybe help me understand a little bit better. And it's a partner at venture capital law firm Silicon Legal Strategy. And Andre Garkanian, he said that, this is kind of a twist on the pay-to-play structure. I said, can they force this conversion or do a forced buyback? He said that they can try to pressure investors, but still they have to get approval. You have to get the requisite approval from existing investors to actually close the deal. And his words were, non-participants are getting screwed and everyone knows it.
Good quote.
So he said, what will typically happen next is weeks of hemming and hawing as the deal is negotiated and final documents drawn. But if the company truly has no other alternatives, the non-participating investors will often relent and consent to the deal. So we don't know if that will happen, if they're going to feel pressure to do so. But if so, this is just wild. I don't even know what to think. I know we need to move on, but I have a feeling this will not be the last time we're talking about Bolt. So speaking of wild stuff, Margaux, you had a great story earlier this week about a former VC who obtained a private island for his new longevity techno-capitalist school. Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. I love the story. It is Balaji Srinivasan, who used to be at A16Z, used to be CTO of Coinbase. He made a ton of money off of Bitcoin, and he's gotten very obsessed in the last few years with this idea of a network state. He wrote a book on it in 2022. He defines it as internet groups acquiring land and sovereignty. And last week, he basically announced that he had taken sort of the biggest step forward in this grand plan of his, which basically he rented out an island somewhere near Singapore. He's taking applications and he's going to run a 90-day quote unquote network school, which there's not a lot of details about, but he has been kind of pushing this agenda for a while. He's inspired other people to do similar things. Last year, Vitalik Buterin, who is an Ethereum co-founder, did one of these in Montenegro for 2 months where he like rented out a resort and had everyone live there. And in practice, it's like basically just a conference, like it's talks and panels. But they do all sorts of kind of like quirky longevity stuff. Like at the Montenegro one, they all wore continuous glucose monitors. They did like polar plunges in the morning.
That's funny.
So yeah, it's super interesting. I don't know what he's going to really do out in Singapore. He's really into like them achieving either like a special economic zone or some sort of sovereignty. So yeah, TBD on that. But it's really fun to follow and read about.
Well, it really does sort of feel like a cult, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, like it has all the qualities of a cult. The same kind of thing where it's like, oh, we can't, with our beliefs, we can no longer take part in the normal cities of the world. We need our own space. And then you go form like an enclave or something like that. And then everybody's living in a weird community where they get all disconnected from reality. And usually it ends in some form of tragedy or destruction. I realize that like every single time I talk, I'm like, everything is going to fall into the sea. But I mean, really, like of all the things, like maybe Story will be fine, maybe Bolt will be fine. But this kind of like dedicated techno cult thing, it feels like just a summer camp for rich people to go, up one another and say like, it's like a big, drum circle, except they're all on their laptops. It's that depressing.
Depressing. That's funny. I was just thinking about it as comical, to be honest with you. The whole thing just sort of amused me. But yeah, I mean, that great story, great find, Margaux. I wonder if we're going to be hearing more about things like this.
No, we definitely will. These guys, they have a lot of money. Peter Thiel's really into this stuff. There will be more of these. This is something that has been like gestating for a long time.
I want to say though that I'm hugely a fan of like people going off and doing their own thing. I think it's great. And like the idea of like going somewhere totally different and being around people that are different from you, not going and finding the clones of yourself, and then going on polar plunges and all this kind of thing. I think it's great, but it's just when you do it this way, it feels culty rather than fun.
Yeah, culty's a good way to describe it. On that note, we're going to pause for a break, but when we get back, we're going to be talking about how AI can be more than just a chatbot. Who would have thought?
Hey everyone, it's Becca Skutak, and I'm here with my esteemed co-host,
me, Dominic Midori Davis, and we're here to tell you about Found, the TechCrunch podcast where we bring you the stories behind the startups.
Each week, we talk with a founder about how they started their company, what gave them the idea, and how it's been going since.
We're having conversations about what it's really like to build and run a company, and we aren't just talking about the rosy narratives you hear from the success stories.
Of course, we are still talking about the big wins and the best days, but we're also touching on the mistakes that help founders learn and grow too.
What have been a few of your favorites, Becca?
I personally love chatting with Matt Rogers about his new food waste startup, Mill, and what he learned from his experience building Bolt Nest and working on the original iPod at Apple.
See, all of the good stuff. And if it sounds interesting to you, then you should subscribe to Found on your podcast platform of choice. We have new episodes out every Tuesday morning.
All right, we're back. And yes, there's more AI to talk about. Devin, there's been a few companies that recently raised, Reliant, Beyond Math, and they're kind of making us think that there's more to AI than just bots. Can you tell us more about that?
I totally can. This is one thing that I really like to cover because I cover a lot of AI stuff. I'm supposedly the AI guy here, but when it comes to these, you're constantly hearing about large language models and it's, here's how we're using Claude to virtualize database management for enterprise. And it's like, my God, that's so boring. I cannot believe how boring they have made artificial intelligence. But then there's actually some cool stuff out there. They're just not getting, billion-dollar investment rounds. And I covered two this week. One is called Reliant, and they're a very science-focused. There's a thing in a lot of scientific disciplines where you have to go through hundreds or even thousands of papers just to find the precedents for things. You want to say, hey, here's some related work. Here's a citation. They need to find so much of this stuff, and there's so much literature. So Reliant is focused on not just finding those papers, you can find them, but analyzing them. And they are using a large language model to do this, so they can understand this is when they're talking about this statistic, or this is what they mean when they say, oh, this drug indicated this outcome in this context. It takes that stuff that's very loose, language-based information and makes it more structured so that scientists can actually say, hey, in these 1,000 papers, we had this amount of data that came from this and that and the other thing. And it's all very automated.
Mm-hmm.
It's all very optimized and automated. And I mean, I should just say automated. That's a much better word. And it does it with a very, very low error rate. They were like, you can do it with ChatGPT and it gets like a 10% error rate and it hallucinates. That's not good. It's like, it's great. 90% is good if you want to apologize profusely to your customers, twice a day. But they're doing that, and they're very focused on just scientists and like pharmacology. It's not about, oh, you can use this for school or whatever.
I love
Isn't
this.
It seems more.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I don't know. When I think about like the biopharma industry, there's so much like data, so many statistics. And I mean, it's just like, it's overwhelming, right? And then the thing I think about is they're trying to, get drugs to market, and in some cases, potentially life-changing drugs. So I'm all for something that can like help make that move faster and be easier. So I love it. And I think sometimes like in the AI space, some things, the companies that are raising like all the money and have no revenue are not doing nearly as cool stuff as something like this, in my humble opinion.
Yeah. And the coolest one really is the other one that I covered, Beyond Math. They're working with Formula One racing companies that they can't name, but there's only, so many. They're working with F1 car designers to make, so these car designers, they have to constantly, they're changing the design of the car by like a millimeter here, a millimeter there to make the airflow over it this much better. But they have to use wind tunnels. They have to use these really old like CAD things. They're very tech focused, but the tools that you have for this kind of thing and for computational fluid dynamics, which is the domain of, air flowing over a surface and stuff like that, it's very computational heavy. And their tools are just not up to the job. It can take days or weeks to run the kind of simulations you need to do to improve the shape of a car. And Beyond Math is using machine learning models trained on like the actual physical descriptions, like equations of computational fluid dynamics, combined with observations of real wind tunnels and stuff like that, to make a sort of virtual wind tunnel that is very physically accurate, but can calculate this stuff instead of like, oh, it'll take 11 hours to run this simulation. You can do it in almost real time. At least that's the claim. And they're working with F1 people so they can say, hey, you want to test out a bunch of weird geometries for the, spoiler or the wheel covers or whatever. Now you don't have to make it run overnight and come back in the morning and see if it worked. You can see if it worked in 5 minutes. And that could lead to some really cool and weird outcomes, not just in F1, which is this very rich, very weird car space, but, just like Toyota saying, hey, we're going to use this to make our, hybrids more fuel efficient because now we can try all these cool different geometries.
That's cool. Margaux, what do you think?
It sounds fun to me. It definitely sounds different than chatbots.
Right? Like it just seems like a really cool applications, cool applications of AI that have a little bit more like really real world applications that can, I hate to sound cliche, but make a difference,
Yeah.
I don't know. Very cool, Devin. You dug both of these companies up, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, like they were ones that sort of reached out to me or that I saw somewhere and was just like, this actually is pretty cool. Even though it's not like a ton of money, it's a bunch of money to them, like $8 million, $11 million. That's nothing compared with, obviously $450 million for Bolt. But I don't know what Beyond Math would have done with $200 million in influencer credits.
Well, there was another raise by an AI company this week, Margaux, that was a little bit more in your neck of the woods or in your world. DevCon AI closed a $44 million seed round to solve a problem of, quote, maximum complexity, military logistics. So that's a pretty big raise. And speaking of defense tech, it feels like there's been an acquisition spree in the space. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So I've been following defense tech for probably about the last 2 years. And over which time it's super blown up. It used to be a very taboo sector for VCs to put their money. But I think with Anduril really succeeding, with Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, it's become almost like a very sexy sector again. VCs have put, I think it's almost $130 billion since 2021 into defense tech.
Wow.
And I've just been waiting for the consolidation to begin. It's really, really, really hard to succeed in defense tech. You can't just make one product well. To be kind of like a quote unquote next prime, which means that you are competing for contracts against Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing. You need to bid for a lot of different contracts. You need to have a wide suite of products, which is why you've seen Anduril in the past few years. They've bought 5 companies, most of which were IP buys to bid for specific contracts. So anyway, I was pitched last week Hadrian, which is a largely autonomous factory producing parts for space and defense companies. They're valued at about $500 million at this point. And they bought Datum Source, which was created by SpaceX alums, and basically just was software for startups to find manufacturing partners. So yeah, I've been very closely following once these defense tech companies start buying each other up and the level of consolidation we are going to see.
So you think we're going to see more, right? I mean, you mentioned this deal. Shield AI bought another company called Sentient Vision Systems too.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically, you're getting all of these startups getting funded right now. Like, it feels like in the last 2 years, the only startups that could get money were AI and defense tech. So you have all of these like Series A startups that at no point will they even make one product that is good enough to, beat Lockheed Martin for any sort of contract. A lot of them are going to get bought up. I've been talking to VCs where I feel like it's kind of a joke of like, maybe the best exit is an Anduril acquisition. So it's something I'm following pretty closely. You're still seeing these companies get funded. I've talked to defense tech VCs who talk about how they kind of prep their LPs for the fact that while most funds maybe are trying to get like 1 or 2 crazy successes, yes, they're trying for that, but they're also like preparing for a good amount of like mid-size exits because acquisitions are very much in the DNA of the defense tech world.
That's interesting. So the definition of a successful exit in the space might be a little bit different than like other sectors, that what might be considered a so-so exit in one sector in defense tech might be just a really great outcome.
I mean, at the end of the day, I've been kind of thinking about it with these startups that are at like the Series A mark. You either try to become a prime, you either try to do what Anduril's doing, where they have kind of 1 million different things they're working on at this point and 1 million different contracts they're trying to be viable for, or you make one thing well and then get bought up. You're not going to IPO making one defense product well. I think you need to be more diversified than that.
Are you seeing a lot of acqui-hires in this space?
I feel like less so, unless it's like the companies that Anduril bought honestly haven't been the like sexy Silicon Valley startups. They've been like deep research guys that just created one piece of really great IP that Anduril bought up.
Yeah, it feels like with Anduril, they've bought themselves a lot of runway to, become a new prime type organization. And they realize that they're hot right now and that they can buy deep research things. They don't have to buy market share in a market that they are not in. Although, they could. But they are seeing that they're doing a 5 to 10 year plan, not a, hey, we need to survive until we get our next funding round, which is so much of what we see.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting, like Margaux, the last 2 years in defense, it's so funny seeing all these investors chasing after it all of a sudden, where before they were like, oh, we don't want to get involved for whatever reason. It's, too much paperwork, or we don't want the bad optics. And then all of a sudden, a couple people start making money and Anduril becomes a multi-billion-dollar company, and all of a sudden the investors decide like, oh, actually it's not that bad, and maybe we should get in there. But it's also true that there's a large diversity of stuff that can be done in the defense space. It's not all just building a faster bullet or whatever. There's a tremendous amount of innovation that is funded by defense and basic research too. So it is a more diverse space than a lot of people think. So I've been trying to square myself with that personally, because it's I'm guilty of that. Like, hey, it's just a big missile factory, but really they do a lot of stuff.
Yeah, it's easy to kind of generalize and lump all defense tech into one category, but I'm sure it's much more diverse than one would think.
Yeah, I mean, the companies I pay the most attention to are ones that are called like dual use, which they have a commercial and they have a defense product. Like Starlink is a great commercial product, and they do a lot of defense contracts as well.
Well, we are going to have to wrap up, but I want to say this has been awesome because with Margaux and Devin, we've had some really cool perspectives on spaces that are really hot right now and really important. And I'm just so glad you were both able to join us. So we'll have to leave it there, but never fear, Equity will be back next week. Until then, you can find Equity under the handle at EquityPod on X and Threads. Hope you have a great weekend. Bye-bye. Equity is produced by Teresa Loconsolo with editing by Kel. Bryce Durbin is our illustrator, and we'd like to give a big thanks to our audience development team and Henry Pickavett, who manages TechCrunch audio products. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.